Hello humans. Today is the 22nd of August. It's the overwoo. We're still in it. We'll be in it for some time. It keeps coming back to the issue of I think people don't understand that during this period of time there's going to be confusion about everything, that there is very little solid information from which to make decisions, and so you're going to be making decisions on the best possible stuff that you can get. I talked about this way back in the day in this video called about the OBDI, the observational dilemma that affects military commanders, where a commander has to rely on someone else's eyes and has to make a decision based on information that he has to filter through his own processing, but that information is coming from someone else, and he has reliability issues about everything. So, and his decisions are going to put other people's lives at risk. We're all in that situation now, and this is a very difficult situation. And so we discover that there are ways to think about things that aid us in this. And so that's why this whole series of stuff about the woo, right? Because if you can objectify your ignorance, your inability to see things, if you can just objectify that, put a label on it, call it the woo, then you have something you can start working with, right? You can mentally start working with this. If you can't objectify it, then it is simply subjective. That is to say that you continually are in it without recognizing it. You're affected by it without recognizing it, and it alters you, again, without recognizing it. As soon as you recognize that the woo is out there, then you can hold yourself independent of the woo, and you can think about it without having to, even though it's affecting your mind, even though your decisions and everything are affected by this, it is isolated and separate from you, and you have the space in which to get a little bit of a view of it, right? As opposed to being completely overwhelmed and living in it without seeing it, very much like a fish in water. So we're fish, and now we can see the water because we've objectified it and we've called it the woo. Now, woo is always going to exist as an amorphous, very difficult to define situation for us, but it is a good thing to have the woo with you, because then you can start thinking critically about things, because you can objectify this thought that you might be affected by something. So okay, so I'll examine all of my decisions a couple of times and come at them from different ways, because maybe my thinking is being affected. That's good. Prevents errors. And you'll be able to say, okay, so I may be affected by things, and so my information streams have to be questioned. So I have to go deeper, I have to look more, I have to look harder to get real solid stuff to make decisions on. And then you can start building up a framework where you can start gelling it around you, as I say. You can start saying, okay, this one thing occurred, I made a decision off of that thing, and this good outcome came from that, or bad outcome came from that, and I learned. And so that one thing that occurred, I can put that in the gelled part of the woo and say that for the moment, this is solid. I can at least push off of that and explore further based on that one thing being solid. And that's how first principles thinking works. Everything leads to the next step, and so on. And so if you start doing this with all of the weird shit going on, the COVID, the pandemic, all of this, then it is easy to see that certain conclusions form and can be pegged by what we find. So we can find, for instance, that COVID was a declared pandemic, and it was declared by the globalists. We didn't see the pandemic erupt. Okay, so this was not a natural event. In a natural pandemic among other animals, among any herd animals or whatever, there's no officialdom to declare it, but the effect of it is the death, is the illness. We didn't see that. We saw it only in China, Italy, and Iran, and from there, everything else was piggybacked to create the pandemic by the globalists, and they declared the pandemic. In a regular pandemic, we would see all the homeless dying, and like in the past ages of the Black Death and other pandemics that have swept through humanity, you see the people that are disenfranchised and at a very low level of personal body maintenance go first. So we should have seen vast quantities of homeless people dead. We should have had trucks hauling them off and had a big social problem dealing with all the dead homeless people. We did not. We don't have vast numbers of apartments empty. We don't have any of these kind of things, except in a couple of weird places in China. In those places in China, these were the places that they ran the trucks down through the streets saying that they were spraying disinfectant. And I think they were actually spraying the aerosolized product, the bioweapon. And because in those areas we actually do find vast numbers of empty apartments now that had been filled, and all kinds of indications that millions of Chinese had died. So now another curious thing here, another thing in our hazy woo, is that we find that in the USA infrastructure bill, it's a U, yeah, we find a curious thing that says all supplements are going to have to be bought on a prescription now. Okay? So they're trying to restrict our ability to get vitamin D. And we know from evidence that the Chinese historically are down here 20 or less in vitamin D levels, as are the Iranians and the Italians who died. They were all down in the area of sufficient, that is to say insufficient, disease level vitamin D. The Italians were dressed in black all the time. The same thing with the Iranians, and the Chinese are sun avoiders. So these people are chronically low in vitamin D. Personally, I have a conclusion that the bioweapon was engineered based on a Chinese phenotype. That is to say, they looked at the various different kinds of Chinese, and they found out that all the various different kinds of Chinese were very low in vitamin D, but they didn't really discover it that way. They didn't look at it that way. They looked at a particular virus that was very susceptible to the Chinese cell structure, to their cells, and chose that as their bioweapon. And then that bioweapon turned out to be relatively weak against other kinds of people. But they didn't care at that point because they had a solution. That solution was the spike protein being put into the vaxx. So we see that the globalists are actually creating a pandemic, and now they're trying, through their captured control of the USA House, Congress, and executive branch, and the judicial system, they're trying to restrict our ability to get vitamin D to protect us from their bioweapon. And then further, if we look at it, we see that there were something like 21 or 25 people who died from the swine flu vax, right? And they shut that program down, killed it right there with just those few number of deaths. Now we've got 72,000 deaths that you can track from public databases. 12,000 here, 27,000 there, 32,000 here, that kind of thing, right? Brazil has got massive deaths from it. And then we look and we get all these doctor reports about the vaccination itself, and we find out that the vax is causing charge state potential changes within the blood. And so we have this very curious thing forming when you get these shots. And it doesn't matter. Apparently it doesn't matter if it's Pfizer or Moderna. There's a difference, right? Because they're giving Pfizer to white people. They're giving Moderna to everybody else here in the Western world, in the USA. AstraZeneca and Johnson, there's a similar kind of a thing going on with them that's racially associated. So all of this stuff comes back to insidious, right? Insidious. And we will just say it's fucking evil. There's just no other conclusions that you can form on this, because when you get these shots, you get a condition forming within what's known as the Endothelium. Okay, the endothelium is this layer of cells on the inside of, that line inside of all of your blood vessels. I'm doing a bad job of drawing it, but it's just one, basically one thin layer right through the, through there. And the spike proteins are ripping the shit out of this endothelial layer, and they're causing the change of electrical charge on your blood. The other stuff's going on too, some really weird stuff. So they're looking at blood now, and they're finding out that people that have had this shot, if they examine their blood is clumping. All of their, a lot of their red blood cells, the platelets are clumping together, and the platelets now have a net positive charge, which is not good. They need to be net negative in order to pick up oxygen and deliver it to the rest of the tissues. And this clumping thing can create vast, long chains which are trying to snake through your blood vessels, and pretty soon they're going to run into a capillary and they won't go, and that'll cut off the blood flow to something. And you'll lose that something when that happens. And further, there are doctors now reporting that they're showing a spike in people with endothelial layer cancer. This right here is an indicator of endothelial layer cancer, but I think it's actually just happening because they're altering the charge state, and they don't necessarily have cancer at this point. But they're just showing the sign of it, so to speak, right? This charge change is not a good thing. It is insidious and evil. And so in our woo, we come back to this thing about Trump. He's telling everybody to go out and get the vaxx. Well, you have to look at Trump. You have to examine him. We're in the haze of the woo. Does Trump spend all of his time on the computers like us? I doubt it. Does he, hang on a second. Does he have people around him that are woo people? Again, I doubt it seriously, right? I don't know that anybody's telling Trump about the things that are going on with the vaccines. I don't know that he's aware. He may be aware of the large number of deaths, but there's another thing about Trump, right? He's older than I am. I'd have to look it up. I don't know how old he is, but he's older than I am. So I'm really close to 70, so he's probably in his 70s. People of that generation, of that age, my generation, we were through the ringer in the 40s and the 50s, in the 60s even, with vaccines. Because at that point, the vaccines were hailed as the savior of humanity, because so many people had become dead from polio. Now we know the Salk vaccine was introduced at the very last days of a natural waning pandemic. And that was a polio pandemic, right? And so the Salk vaccine did not stop the polio pandemic, which was just stopping on its own. But everybody on the planet thought it did because of the coincidence of the time it was introduced, and then the globalists pimping out the whole narrative. Now, bear in mind, the globalists have been working on a depopulation plan with 3 giant world wars, followed by the bacteriological or bioweapon war. And that plan was originated and designed by this guy by the name of Albert Pike. And you'd have to look him up. It was in the 1800s, and he was a Freemason, and he came up with this plan. I don't think it was his per se. He worked on it. They've been talking about this kind of stuff back in, way back in the 1800s with the royals. They were concerned then, before the collapse of the British Empire, with the problems that the British were encountering with all of these colonies of people that were not like them. Like the globalists, I mean. And the globalists could control these other people far better than the white people they were saddled with in Britain, who kept basically coming up to the point of revolution. Something would happen and the royals would have to do something with them, right? They'd have to exile them to America, ship them off as prisoners to Australia, that kind of thing. So sooner or later they would just be an irritant and they would have to be dealt with. And so we've had these things happen. And the globalists don't own anything, right? Truly, the Queen owns nothing. She tills no land or any of that kind of stuff, right? All of this stuff is a titled ownership, titular ownership. This ownership is notional in the sense that you have the notion that the Queen owns 70% of the land in Britain. But the fact is that if the people in Britain just decided to spread out into all the land that the Queen titularly owns, then she does not own it, because she would not in any way be able to enforce her will or her ownership rights against the population of Britain. And that's why the British have such a weird housing situation, is that the Queen and her reptilian worshipping cohort claim to own some vast numbers of the lands in Britain, and they don't let the common people out and about in them, right? And so this is the way of our world. And our globalists are on top of a giant pyramid of stuff. This is all getting back towards Trump. Trump knows a lot of this stuff about the Wu. Okay, he knows about the globalists. He's sent us signals about this in dealing with the Queen and these kind of things. Is he? I would think that there are opportunities for him to be aware of the nature of the vaccine. However, in my way of thinking, the Wu nature of the vaccine. However, in my life, my opinion of vaccines has gone through a radical reappraisal, because I grew up and was inculcated in the idea of this was the science that was going to save humanity from future ills, right? And so on, not knowing it was indeed a tool of the globalist elite. And had been part of their plan. You have to go into the Wu, you have to dive around, you have to get involved, you have to research, you have to come up to these conclusions. And Trump is not that kind of guy. He's not focused on technology and all of these kind of things. So it may be that he knew that the vaccine is a money-making grab by the globalists, right? So he may know many elements of the vax as a negative, and yet could still be pushing it, so to speak, could still be stating it, because I heard his little thing where he stated he's very proud of them and so on, because they were developed and this kind of thing. Did he know that they were existent? How much of this stuff was he aware of? No way of telling. This is the haze that is in the Wu. If he knew everything about the vax, it might be that he still had no choice other than to play the role he's playing because of the larger elements involved. So this is truly about the decapitation of our power pyramid here, right? And so Trump is fighting here. These people would kill him. They'd kill his family, everybody. If they had a hope in hell of doing it, they would have done it a long time ago. And they probably tried repeatedly. So that's the kind of war we're at here. And there are going to be people dying in this war. Does he? I'm sure that Trump is aware that there are, Wu threads through the Wu about the global depop and all of that. Did he know they were going to try and do it with the war with Hillary Rodham Clinton if she'd gotten in the nuke war and stuff? Maybe so. In which case he could legitimately claim that his presidency was disruptive and we didn't have nuclear wars. Has the COVID been a real pandemic? Has it killed bazillions of people? No. The overall global death rate hasn't varied very little. It is a nasty bioweapon, but it has not, in fact, ravaged through the population. There have been more people killed in China, I think, than throughout the rest of the world from this. And that's because the Chinese were desperate to reduce their population. They're running into the same issues that everybody else, and that is relative to the petrodollar. So this is where the haze of the Wu gets really, really deep, and you got to understand things, right? If certain things happen. So if, for instance, you had a nuclear war in which we lost, say, 5 major cities, we might have had 25 million people killed initially. Then there might have been another 25 million people that would have been dead over the course of, say, the next 5 years as a result of that problem here, and whatever damage on the other side, whoever the globalists would have picked for us to fight, right? China or somebody, right? We would have killed same number of millions there. And so maybe there might have been 100 million people globally that would have been dead from a nuclear war. And so we've saved those people. But if we had to, if you have to look at it from the planner's viewpoint, if they do that and if they subdue the thread that leads us through time to that nuclear war, and they put in a disruptor and gets rid of the activator, then what are the consequences? Well, some of the consequences are predictable, because these guys have to keep going because the petrodollar is breaking down. Their whole goal, the globalists, the whole goal was to have a nuclear war so that they could blame the crash on the nuclear war and the subsequent death. And then in the process of that, they could also blame the pandemic on the nuclear war, the horrible conditions, all of that, natural disease breakout, all of this kind of stuff that would eliminate a lot of the people. And then they would be nice and happy with their 500 million who would be too dumb to remember any of this stuff and would think that it was a natural occurrence. But that didn't happen. So now the globalists are panicking. And so they had to release their bioweapon anyway, even though it's not particularly effective as a bioweapon unless you do a lot of stuff to make it effective, like jab it into you with a needle. They have to do that because they're desperate to cover up the corruption that's led to the death of the petrodollar and the fact that we're at the end of empire, and that we basically have to decapitate the globalists in order for us to proceed. And then that changes everything. That's a radical different change, okay? So this is very optimistic. I don't want to be negative here at all, even though we're going to go through an extremely hard time. And so if you go read that book, I don't know the guy's names, I think it's Strauss, but it's The Fourth Turning. You get an idea about how generations have things that are in common to them that are forced on them by circumstances. And there are generations born now that are alive now, young adults, that are going to go through shit that's going to alter them as individuals. They will change. Universe is changing them through the circumstances that we're going to encounter. And so like this pandemic and all of this kind of stuff, right? So the Wu people are fighting the incredible mind control and not taking the self-euthanizing shot. And so the Wu people, just in that act, are now tougher. They're harder than they were before the existence of the pandemic. So Universe has changed them that way. Universe has also changed many of them because they're starting to pay attention to their bodies and how these work, and they're starting to think about things differently in ways that they would not absent that pandemic. And so people are dying in the pandemic, mainly from the vaxx at this stage, and they'll be dying for a number of years from the problems of this insidious evil vaxx and what they've done. I am not blaming Trump because I think that he's not the kind of guy that sits around and does a lot of shit looking at computers, right? I could not imagine someone a few years older than myself being in that position. That is to say, with all the demands on his time and being able to do your own research in the Wu. So you'd have to rely on people. And there's the thing. Trump's surrounded by normies. You know? Gotta love all these guys, right? General Flynn, you know, all these people. I mean, they're all good guys, right? But they're all normies. Maybe some of the very high-end military people have come into contact with shit that has blown their mind to the point that they're not normies. But most of these people are normies. So those guys are not going to give Trump Wu advice. So they're not going to say, look, you know, we now have a hard issue here and we're going to have to have this. Because see, they've got a plan that's been going for fucking decades, that's had a lot of people involved and millions of people are working on it, all kinds of shit going on, and you can't disrupt that plan all of a sudden because you discover that they're actually put the bioweapon into the vaxx. You can do things, right? You can do things like put the word out as much as you can among various different people to be anti-vax. You could actually push out this idea of being a medical freedom fighter. And you can get that as a part of the subculture. But in their particular approach for getting the globalists out of here, they're not able at this stage to take a hard stance against this here because it is we know it to be a weapon, but it's also, it's really weaponized medicine. And that gets into some serious damn woo, where you start getting into stuff that leads to the idea of like V, the movie, right? And you get into a situation where the woo is so deep that you're going to lose almost everyone. And I don't know that they could present stuff to Trump that would tell him that, look, this is this level of insidious evil. They're not simply corrupting people, killing people individually and so on. They want to do vast quantities of mass murder, and maybe we should tone down the ideas of pimping on the vax, right? Now, at some point that will have to happen, because at some point the woo is going to penetrate through to up here in through his normie advisors, and Trump will get the message about the vax. But it takes the framework falling away from their eyes before the woo can slap them, and they'll see what's going on, and they can form these chains of conclusions. You have all of the material in your brain if you've been doing research for years. Even as a normie, you've come across a lot of this stuff, but you've discarded it. And then what happens is you get to a point where there's an emotional something, a shock, and a particular structure in your brain falls away, and then it has to recreate. When it recreates, it opens up in the sense that you can take in new information, and that's when the woo takes in, and you've got all this stuff in there, and a new conclusion is formed. So you see the same facts, but you come to a different conclusion. And so now we're starting to see that we're getting, near cancer kind of indicators here, but is it actually cancer, or is it just simply that the material, this non-absorbing of light material, these weird threads they're now showing up in the blood, are in some way changing the electrical state? This is important, right? Maybe these people don't have endothelial cancer, and maybe these weird thread things that are coming in, probably the graphene oxide and all of this other material, all the nanomaterial, maybe that stuff is simply changing the electrical state. If this were the case, could it be that electrolysis or that dialysis style blood scrubbing would do the job? Could you take somebody that is suffering from vaccinosis, that at this level where they've got long chains of red blood cells clinging together, could you run them through a dialysis machine and scrub that stuff out? Maybe so. Because the dialysis machine, one of the things that it does, because of the membranic materials that it's going through, is that it restores charge state to the blood, to the plasma. So perhaps so, right? So if you look at things differently from the woo, you can come to different conclusions. So I'm making a conclusion, a leap, an intellectual leap from just a few elements of information and diving deep into the woo and saying, is there something that might do this, right? And that gives me a target to work off of, a goal to work off of. And it's entirely disruptive to the normal course of treatment, perhaps, right? You don't treat cancer with dialysis as a rule. I mean, that's, most cancers are not treated with a dialysis machine. So are the people that are treating this going to the endothelial issues and the clumping blood going to think about dialysis? I don't know. But this is the nature of the woo and why the woo is valuable. Most people, though, because we're in this structured paradigm that the globalists have created for thousands of years, and we're just in the hardened stage of it, our mainstream media has formed such a hard framework around people that the woo just does not get in to our leaders, right? Now, the globalists, if they were the leaders, they don't need the woo to get in because they're organizing all this evil and insidious shit, right? Trump needs the woo to get in to recognize that his enemy is not just a normal kind of an enemy. His enemy is some really fucking weird kind of reptile shit. And like I say, maybe among the normies, there are some military people that have, encountered some shit out there that are privy to some stuff, and they're really, they're woo people. But they're not going to be walking around woo people because they're all classified woo people. So this is the kind of stuff we've got here, is that they actually have classification structures that prevent them from talking about the woo. I got no restrictions whatsoever. So it's very ironic. I'll talk to you all day long about the woo, about space aliens, about spaceships, all the different kind of stuff that they keep classified, right? So do I have classified facts that they have? Some of them, yeah. I accidentally, right? And I don't even know the facts that I have are classified. But I can just talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. So you guys get the benefit of understanding the woo and this kind of stuff, and it's actually isolated from, because of the structure we live in, from our leaders, right? And so this is why you get the curious state of affairs that we have at this moment. So I'm going to say that at this stage, we have a big bunch of woo around the question of Trump and his relation to the vaxx. That doesn't mean that Trump's a bad guy. It doesn't mean that he's in with the globalists. It means that he's within a structure. He may be much more woo than I give him credit for, but even he would not be able to be expressive of that woo because of all of the giant mass of normies that is the population of the world. You can't freak out the herd, right? So things have to, you got to educate the herd slowly, and it takes a while. The good part of this is that because of the Q stuff, the Q stuff, in my opinion, was very much like teaching neural nets stuff. It was a distributed education system that was intended to form loci or nexus points from which the information would be distributed. And we know it was very effective because the mainstream media has been fighting it so hard, just been pushing on it so damn hard. And I think it's because it was and is highly effective. And because of the decentralized distribution of it, it's not able to be suppressed, not able to be stopped. You have a lot of the naysayers and so on, but they also have been self-identified as agents for the deep state, for the globalists. Anyway, so I'm going to give Trump a woo shield at the moment. I'm just going to say he's off in the woo. He shouldn't be saying that, in my opinion. He should not be saying the vaxxes are good or any of that kind of stuff, in my opinion. But I'm a deep woo paranoid, so I don't judge the rest of the world by me. I'm just saying he's doing that. I don't think he should be doing that, but he's doing that. And so, okay, that's out in the world now. And we have to deal with it because you got to deal, you got to discover, you got to deal with all this shit coming up out of the woo. Okay, so the petrodollar is dying, all right, very rapidly. And this death is going to be ugly in many, 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 many regards. But the good news is, okay, so the petrodollar was going to die no matter what. You only get X number of years on a fiat currency. The globalists create fiat currencies through the bank. They know that there's this time limit, 50 years, 52 years, whatever it is, on all of their fiat money, and the petrodollar was going to die. They were going to cover their ass and say, oh guys, hey, we've been skimming you and we made ourselves gigantically rich and have abused you all for all these centuries. And for the last century here, and we're going to have a war, and then thus throw confusion on your mind, and you won't recognize that we're doing another reset to start it all over again, so we can do the same thing to whoever's left, and let you breed out again, and take all this stuff all over again. And so it's a scam. It's a what is it? Wash, rinse, and repeat, right? And that's their plan. And so they didn't have the war, so now much is able to be discovered. So they dumped in the bio war, and it didn't work out the way they wanted because they wanted to have 5 years lockdown period of time, and then the vax to 95% of the population. Guns aiming at you, and if you don't take it, they're going to shoot you for your health. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Or to protect somebody else, so you're going to shoot me dead so that someone else doesn't get a vax? Yeah, sure, that makes a lot of sense, guys. Or doesn't get the virus. Anyway, so the petrodollar is dying, okay, very rapidly. Now, usually, like the last time that their dollar died in the 1930s, we went into a great, huge depression, and lots of people died as well, and it was miserable. We're not going to do a depression this way again. There's not going to be a depression like that, okay? So what's going to happen here, I'm going to take all this down. What's going to happen here is that the petrodollar is going to die And we're going to go through a change. I don't know how to characterize it, but it's not going to be a depression the way we have had depressions in the past. Because I think, well, okay, I can state an adequate conclusion that we're not going to go through a depression the way we have in the past because the circumstances are radically different. So we have a depression of what? Of the money system. Okay, it's not, we get depressed, mentally, we're down and so on, but it's the money system that is depressed. What really gets depressed is the fact that it is a system. That is to say, it is designed by the globalists, which is powered by the bankers, the banksters. That's why I've always referred to them as banksters. They're gangsters, right? They just own a bank, no difference. Anyway, so our money system usually goes into a depression because they only can do this. So basically what happens is everybody works, they rake off tons of stuff so that we have less. The people that are working, they don't work. They just steal. And then everybody that works has less. And they keep doing this, and then they get greedy and they take too much, and we suffer. And they don't want us to see that they're stealing all the money and not working. And so they have a war, and we kill each other off, and then everybody that's left doesn't remember the conditions that caused the war, and that it was all this depression money system thing that's all designed to do this, and that is their designed solution for their designed system. These people are not terribly intelligent. They're just clever. And so they can work their system and they can rake it off the rest of us if they control the media. If they don't control the media, they're really, shit out of luck. They don't control independent media, so now they're shit out of luck and things are happening. Now this time, we're going to lose the globalists, right? We're going to lose the globalists and probably lose a lot of the banks. You're probably better off if you've got digital dollars, petrodollars. You're probably better off getting them out of the banking system fairly rapidly. But if you're going to keep some in the banking system, I would use a credit union or a state bank, a low level regional bank kind of thing, right? But anyway, so we're going to get rid of the globalists and the bankers. And this time they won't be able to start this whole system over again. And what was necessary always in order to start the system over again was a giant depression. And because they have to reset everything back to a certain level so that the inflation rate comes, but they basically have to deflate the system that they've recently inflated. And inflation is a terrible thing because that is the act of theft. So if they inflate your money, they're taking 2 or 3%, whatever they nominally say, maybe 6 or 7 or 10% of the purchasing power. So they're stealing from you. And so they use a depression to reset everything back down to a base level, and then they can start inflating again, continuing to steal from you until it gets too egregious, and then they got to do it all over again. And so here we're at this point where they were going to try and do the depression. By killing a lot of people, they were going to try and cause circumstances to where we wouldn't look at them. And that's not going to happen. So we're going to look at them, and things are going to be different this time. And we won't do their shit anymore. And so I'm of the opinion that there won't be a depression as was defined by the depression of the 1930s, global, right? There will be economically affected areas around the planet for hundreds of years from this event. But in the main, my opinion is that these economically affected areas will be in a rapid change towards a positive outcome. The reason is that we won't have the globalists fucking things up anymore, and we won't be under the domination of their mainstream media causing the mind control that allows them to dictate all of the aspects of what you do with your money and how it works and this sort of thing. So imagine the situation where industries collapse and there's a political will to get off our butts and recreate these industries. And at that stage, we need capital. Well, we're not going to be going to the globalists and the bankers for capital. That means instantly we've got their backsheesh, their grift, their VIG. We've got the VIG, okay? So because they would loan you a certain amount, but you had to pay back that amount plus that amount. And so you're always net negative, right? We're not going to have that situation because we're going to go back to some form of constitutional money, solid money, hard money. Hard money is called hard money or solid money because it is not inflatable. And because it's not inflatable, it has a tendency to go from person to person to person to person to person and not get pieces raked off all the time to the point where it deflates in its purchasing power to virtually nothing, which is where we're at now. So our change here in this current time, the Great Awakening, the move into this change of ages, is going to also impact our money. And it's going to impact our lives. Now, I can't say that 401ks are safe because they're probably not. I can't say that anybody's retirement or any financial thing is going to work out in any particular way because that would be financial advice and I'm legally constrained from doing so. Plus, I don't know. I don't know how anybody's financial things are going to work out. I don't do finances that way. But I do know things at a broader level relative to the economy. And I know that the mainstream media and their mind control and stuff, absent that, when we don't have that, and when we don't have a system then that's designed, and when we don't have globalists, and when we don't have bankers, then we don't have a need for a depression. And what we're left with is money that we build through our labor, through our work, through the extra calories that we produce. And then we don't have anybody stealing those calories from us. So in that sense, I would happily pay taxes if I didn't have to pay interest on debt. Easy to fund a government that way. Just what you need kind of a government. So the fiat money, the inflation, the Federal Reserve Bank, the central banks all around the planet, they're dying. When they go away, the inflation of everything goes away because that process begins with the money and everybody is hooked on the money. If we don't have that, if we don't have that system, then the whole world is open to us and we don't know what we're going to create. But we do know that we're going to have a solid monetary system, right, based on sound money. And sound money operates differently than fiat. And so I can say that it is easily projected that certain things will occur. And that these certain things will occur around the idea of a return to capitalism and real capitalism. We haven't had that, right? We've never lived in that. There's never been an example in my lifetime of actual real capitalism because the globalists and the bankers and the central banks have been involved fucking the world over with, their economic hitmen and all of the various plans and so on. So even China with their Belt and Road program, that's going to crash, that's going to fail because it's another one of these central banks schemes to do this that's been laid on top of a political agenda to tie all of these nations into this big trade zone. And I think it's going to crash miserably because of the economic conditions and the nature of all the banks that are going down. Bear in mind, China exists off of USA money, off the petrodollar. As much as everybody wants to get loose from the petrodollar, it fuels the whole world. And when it crashes, there's going to be major changes that will occur. Politically, in governance and all of this kind of thing. And so within the Wu, we've got this period of time here where things have not yet gelled for the normies relative to the economic conditions, but they will soon. And at this time, you can nudge people, you can get them to start doing things and convert over to a new system, get into something that's not an inflationary fiat currency. Gold, silver, land. Land is a little dodgy, right? It's not liquid. I'm not making financial advice here anyway. I'm just stating basically the obvious. Cryptocurrencies, these kind of things, right? That are non-inflationary because we're going to go into a non-inflationary hard money, true capitalism world. not the crony capitalism of the globalists. And the globalists are actually communists. Okay, communism is defined as a central pyramidical power structure with the leader on top and everybody else is equal. So as we learn from Animal Farm, everybody in communism is equal. Some are just more equal than others, and those some are your leaders. And so it's entirely a power structure. It's not economic. All of that stuff is bullshit. And it's all going to be failing, because the only way communism ever worked on this planet was because there was capitalism on the outside of it that basically it could feed off of. So that's all going to go away. Now, there are other aspects of this. So the die-off is deflationary. As people die, they're not out there inflating assets, creating new things, right? So the die-off within the currency system would be a deflationary event. In that sense, I would expect that supports the idea of a depression, okay, starting in like 2022 or something. But I don't think that so yes, I think we could call whatever we're going to go into a depression, but it's not going to be like the previous depressions. So I'm going to call it a petro-depression, a petrodollar depression, because it's a unique event on the other side of which we will not return to the cycle that existed when we came into it. The COVID, the vaxx, all of that is 100% connected to the petrodollar depression that they wanted to engineer, because their goal was to have you not live to collect your retirement. So since that was the goal, and you were not to live that long because everybody was going to get the vaxx, 95% of the population was going to get the vaxx or get shot in the head, that kind of deal. Basically, they're just going to hold you down and put a needle in you and watch you die, right? They weren't going to waste bullets. Because of that, we know that they didn't want you to live long enough to reach retirement and collect your 401k and this kind of thing. Thus, I suspect that there is no there. So I'm not making financial advice or predictions or whatever. I'm just stating that it would seem a good conclusion that there's been some serious shenanigans, and they didn't want a lot of people showing up to collect retirement that just isn't there. Anyway, so and it's it's insidious and evil all the way around, killing all these people for their globalist agenda, for their weird religion, or whatever their individual motivation is. Speaking of individual motivation, I'll shut this off here real quick. The thing I find really difficult to accept is are the individuals. I guess I can accept it. If the globalists are going to kill us off by the millions, then why am I bothered that an individual nurse sits there, injects someone, who then starts spewing blood out of every orifice and dies at her feet, and she goes on to inject the next person while that's all going on behind her. So, it just really got to me, that particular set of images. I'm not putting them out there. They were sent to me by a friend who's in another country. Anyway, so if you've been injected, go get a D-dimer test, okay? Find out if you've got blood clots forming, and at least you can get a base level to see if it changes over time, even if there's no effect at all. A lot of people, I think, have received, or some people, I don't know a lot, but some people have indeed received saline or Wu-Taj vials, nothing that would actually harm them. There's a number of people walking around that should be made ill by this because of the other people that are being made ill by it. So there's some level of woo involved with the whole rollout of the vax stuff as well. And I think it'll take us a number of years to figure out even a quarter of what's actually going on. I've got to get moving. I got stuff to do. This was just a little bit of woo to address the fact that we're in the haze, right? It's never going to be clear, and we can't expect it to be clear. And don't be brittle about that, right? Don't get into the issue of saying, well, Trump's in league with the globalists because of his particular speaking about vaccines that way, right? How many people does Trump saying that actually cause to get a vaccine? I'm not going to get a vaccine just because Trump says so. And see, there's the thing, right? Look at it this way. The woo people, okay, the Trump followers, they're not sheep. They're not sheep. They're going to get the vaccine on their own or not. They're going to make that decision on their own or not. I don't think Trump has the charismatic power or authority to get out there and say, y'all get the vaccine, and have everybody go and get the vaccine. I don't think anybody in his followers are going to go get the vaccine. I think he knows that. He's a very politically astute individual. Has huge amounts of acumen that way. And I've pondered this. I really don't see, I mean, I know a lot of Trump people, none of them have taken the vaccine, right? So Trump says he likes the vaccine, he's proud of the vaccine. What's going to be the response to that? Well, all of us woo guys, we're not going to get the vaccine whether Trump likes it or not. But the left, maybe he's actually saving a bunch of leftists that are saying to themselves, if Trump likes that and he's proud of it, maybe I don't want to get it. See, it's a haze, it's chronic, and the woo is way deep, and it goes back several thousands of years. So live long and prosper, guys. We've got a rough couple of years ahead of us, rough couple of decades.